They imagined the iPhone 10 years before Steve Jobs. They had billions in funding, the smartest engineers on the planet, and absolute creative freedom. Then they built nothing.
Wait, who are they?
The same people who built the original Macintosh. And their failure has everything to do with why the iPod seceded.
Oh, wow.
Welcome to Deep Into the Pages.
And welcome to you, the listener tuning in with us today.
Mm-hmm.
So we are getting into a book that, honestly, it fundamentally upends how we think about creativity and problem solving, really.
Yeah, it completely flips it.
Right. It's called Inside the Box, How Constraints Make Us Better by David Epstein. And, our entire lives were basically fed this cliche, right, to think outside the box.
Right, exactly. Like, break the rules.
Yeah. We're conditioned to believe that if we just had, like, a longer runway, an unlimited budget, no management breathing down our necks, we would finally unleash our absolute masterpiece.
But Epstein is basically attacking that idea directly.
Completely. He argues that absolute freedom is actually a trap for the human mind, and that structural constraints like being forced into a very tight, really uncomfortable box are the actual biological engines of breakthrough innovation.
Which is such a wild concept, but to really grasp it, we have to start by looking at this defining piece of tech history that proves the point in just spectacular fashion.
Right, the 1990s story.
Yeah. So if you ever wondered what happens when brilliant people are given literally everything they ask for, we have to go back to 1990. We're looking at a team of legendary Apple engineers.
Meet the rock stars of the era.
They have absolute rock stars, people like Mark Porat, Andy Hertzfeld, Bill Atkinson. I mean, these are the visionaries who literally willed the original Macintosh into existence.
Right.
So they decide they want to spin off into their own company, and they call it General Magic. And their goal wasn't just to build, like, a new computer.
It was way bigger than that, yeah.
Yeah. Porat wanted to create what he described as an information economy that you could just, hold in the palm of your hand.
And just to put that in context for you listening, 1990 is an era where most people still thought of computers as these massive, clunky beige boxes.
Sitting on a desk, yeah.
Right, mostly used for, like, word processing and spreadsheets. The World Wide Web didn't even really exist in the public sphere yet.
Nope, not at all.
Yet here is Mark Porat walking around with this little red leather notebook, and it contains a sketch he called the pocket crystal.
And if you look at that sketch today, it will seriously send shivers down your spine, because he drew this thin, rectangular piece of glass.
The crazy.
No physical keyboard, right? No protruding buttons. It relied entirely on a touchscreen interface.
Which was basically science fiction back then.
Exactly. And he mapped out a device that seamlessly combined a telephone, a fax machine, a pager, a video game console, and an ecosystem of what we would now call downloadable apps.
It's the iPhone. It's literally the iPhone.
He even conceptualized the use of tiny little emotional icons for communication.
Wait, really? Like emojis? Yes. Essentially inventing emojis a full 17 years before Steve Jobs stood on a stage and unveiled the actual iPhone.
So the vision is flawless. I mean, they have the foresight. But what happens next is just this fascinating study in how, like, an abundance of resources can actually completely poison execution.
Yeah, because they don't just get a little seed funding.
Oh, no. They spin off from Apple, and Apple's CEO at the time, John Sculley, he helps them assemble what becomes known simply as the Alliance.
Which just sounds incredibly ominous.
It sounds like a supervillain group. And financially, it basically was. We're talking about a consortium of Sony, Motorola, AT&T, Philips, Panasonic, and Toshiba.
Unbelievable. Just the titans of global electronics.
The undisputed titans. And they poured so much money into General Magic that the company was operating with virtually unlimited funding.
And what's crazy is that backing was so massive and involved so many direct competitors sitting in the very same boardroom.
Oh, the lawyer thing. Yes. Every single leadership meeting had to begin with an antitrust lawyer standing up and reading a strict list of topics they were legally prohibited from discussing, just so they wouldn't violate federal monopoly laws.
That paints such a vivid picture of the sheer, just corporate power behind them. And they eventually go public with a concept IPO, right?
Yeah, they have absolutely no finished product.
Zero revenue.
Yeah.
And yet, Goldman Sachs takes them public, and the stock doubles on the first day. So this creates what Porat described as a heaven for engineers.
But heaven can get pretty chaotic, right?
Exactly. Let's look at what that heaven actually looked like on the ground. When you have no budget pressure and no hard deadlines, The culture just morphs.
Right, they had people bringing their pets into the office.
Yeah, like rabbits and parrots just wandering around the workstations.
Yeah.
Engineers are engaging in these massive slingshot fights in the hallways.
Which, I mean, it sounds incredibly fun, but structurally, they were building in a total vacuum. Because they had no constraints, they didn't have to make any hard choices about who they were actually building this for. They were designing the pocket crystal for this vaguely defined hypothetical consumer that they just called Joe Sixpack.
Which is a catastrophic flaw in product design, because Joe Sixpack in 1993 doesn't even own a dial-up modem.
Right, let alone understand a wireless app ecosystem.
Exactly.
Mm.
When you're building for everyone, you are building for no one. You don't know what features to prioritize, which means, critically, you don't know what to cut.
And that lack of a boundary leads directly to what product designers call the Christmas tree effect.
Or futuritis. It's that compulsion to just keep adding ornaments to the tree simply because you have them, until the branches literally snap under the weight.
Okay, I have to share a specific story from the book here that perfectly encapsulates this madness because it's so funny.
Oh, the calendar app.
Yes. So one of the General Magic engineers was assigned to write the code for a simple calendar application for the device, a standard task. And he codes it to handle dates from 1904 to 2096, which, for a device being built in the early 90s, is a perfectly logical, robust time frame.
100-year spread is more than enough for a daily planner, I would think.
Right. But because there are no constraints, a co-founder walks by the engineer's desk, looks at the code, and says, well, what if a third-party developer wants to write a historical app? The calendar needs to go back further.
Oh, man.
And what if they want to write a science fiction app? It needs future dates. So the engineer just throws out his work and rewrites the underlying code so the calendar starts at the year 1.
Which is already completely absurd for a pocket planner.
But it gets worse. Someone else in leadership looks at that and asks, why year 1? Why limit it to human history?
Right.
Yes. They said, why not start at the beginning of astronomical time? And because there is no project manager screaming about a deadline or a budget, the engineer spends a massive amount of highly paid time coding a calendar app that technically extends to the end of the universe.
They burned unbelievable resources answering the question, what if?
Exactly. What if, what if, what if?
It's the tragedy of starting from scratch, just because you can afford to. In a documentary made about them years later, one of the engineers uses this brilliant analogy.
It's Car Factory one, right?
Yeah. He says their process was like deciding you want to sell a new automobile, but instead of setting up a factory and sourcing, standardized steering wheels and tires, you decide to hand build the entire car from the toe bolts up.
Reinventing every single component along the way.
Right. They didn't just try to build the device, they tried to invent their own programming language, their own unique microchips, their own proprietary virtual network.
And the end result of all that unconstrained freedom was an absolute disaster.
Just a mess.
When the device finally limped to the market, years late, it was so bloated, it was way too big to actually fit in a pocket. The battery life was abysmal.
And ironically, despite all the futuristic promises, you still had to physically plug it into a landline telephone jack to use any of the communication features.
Right. So nobody bought it. The company completely imploded. But out of the ashes of that massive failure comes the twist that drives this whole narrative forward.
Tony Fadell.
Yes. Tony Fadell was a young engineer, barely in his 20s, working at General Magic during its collapse.
So he had a front row seat to the disaster.
Exactly. He watched his absolute idols, the rock stars of Silicon Valley, fail spectacularly. Fast forward several years, and Fadell is hired by Apple to build a portable digital music player.
Which, of course, becomes the iPod.
Right. But Apple's leadership, having watched the General Magic debacle, imposes brutal constraints on Fadell. They tell him, you have a microscopic team, you have a razor-thin budget.
And a hard deadline.
An absolute non-negotiable deadline. You must have this product ready to ship for the Christmas holiday season, which gave him less than a year to invent, design, and manufacture a groundbreaking piece of hardware.
Less than a year. That's insane.
And the final rule they gave him, do not build everything from scratch.
So he was given a tiny sandbox and basically told to play only within those walls.
And Fadell, having learned the bitter lesson of total freedom, embraced the walls. He immediately started looking for existing pieces he could just adapt rather than invent.
Right. He licensed a processor from an outside company. I think it's called Portal Player.
Yep, Portal Player. And here is my absolute favorite detail from the book. The iconic click wheel, the physical interface that completely defined the iPod and made it a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah, scroll wheel.
Apple didn't invent the mechanics of it out of thin air. Fidel's team adapted the underlying technology from a Danish cordless telephone.
Wow. That is a staggering contrast.
Yeah.
You have essentially the same caliber of world-class engineering talent. Right?
Same DNA,
Yeah.
basically.
In one environment, given total freedom and unlimited cash, they produce a useless brick. In another environment, strangled by a holiday deadline and forced to scavenge parts, they produce a device that reshapes the entire music industry.
It's incredible.
But, let me press on this a bit. Because if you're listening to this, you might be thinking, okay, so the lesson is just work within your means. Like, don't bite off more than you can chew.
Right, like standard business advice.
Yeah, that feels a bit like a dusty proverb from our grandparents. So is Epstein arguing that this is just good project management? Or is there an actual underlying biological mechanism at play here? Like, why does the human brain react this way to limitations?
Oh, it is absolutely a biological mechanism. And this is where Epstein introduces a concept from psychology called the cognitive miser.
Okay, the cognitive miser.
Yeah. So decades of evolutionary biology and cognitive science have revealed that the human brain is essentially inherently lazy. It is an energy hoarding machine.
Like it wants to conserve calories.
Exactly. Your brain only accounts for about 2% of your body weight, but it consumes roughly 20% of your daily calories. From an evolutionary standpoint, deep, novel thinking is metabolically expensive and physically exhausting.
Right, our ancestors needed to conserve that energy for physical survival.
Yeah.
Hunting, gathering, running away from predators.
Exact.
Burning calories on abstract, novel problem solving was an actual biological risk.
Precisely. So the brain developed a survival mechanism. When you face a problem and you have unlimited freedom, your brain doesn't naturally want to venture into the unknown to find a novel solution. It defaults to the path of least resistance.
It just wants the easy way out.
Right. It reaches into its filing cabinet and pulls out a familiar pattern, a known routine, because executing a known routine requires very little metabolic energy.
So if you have infinite money, the brain says, well, just buy the standard solution.
Yep. And if you have infinite time, the brain says, just keep tinkering with what we already know.
Wow. So unlimited freedom doesn't actually breed innovation. It breeds complacency.
Yes. And constraints act as a biological override. A constraint blocks that path of least resistance. If you suddenly don't have the budget to buy the standard tool, or if the deadline is so tight you can't use your normal drawn-out process.
The brain is cornered.
Exactly. It realizes the familiar pattern will fail. And that panic, that friction, it forces the brain to wake up, spend the metabolic energy, and physically forge new neural pathways to find a creative workaround.
I think visualizing this makes it much easier to grasp.
Oh, the analogy from the book. Yes.
Right. So if you picture a massive volume of water, and let's say that water represents your creative energy, your budget, your resources.
Okay, got it.
If you take all that water and pour it out over a perfectly flat, boundless plain, which represents absolute freedom, what happens to the water?
It just spreads out everywhere.
It spreads out, it gets incredibly shallow, creates stagnant pools, and it loses all of its momentum. It goes absolutely nowhere.
Right.
But if you introduce constraints, if you build towering canyon walls, you radically change the physics of that water. Those walls force the water into a narrow channel.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, the constraint concentrates the flow, it builds immense pressure, and it generates violent velocity. The limitation doesn't destroy the water. The limitation creates the power. Without canyon walls, you don't get the Colorado River.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it, the canyon walls. And Epstein proves that these walls aren't just necessary for, Silicon Valley hardware. They are the driving force behind almost every major leap in scientific and artistic history.
Really? Like what?
Well, look at Dmitry Mendeleev, the Russian chemist who gave us the periodic table of elements.
Oh, right. The cultural myth surrounding Mendeleev is that he was like the ultimate unconstrained genius.
Yeah, the dream story.
Right. The story goes that he was exhausted one night, fell asleep at his desk, and the entire structure of the periodic table just magically appeared to him in a dream, handed down by the muse.
It's a great myth, but Epstein completely dismantles it. The reality of how the periodic table was born is rooted in a very mundane, incredibly stressful constraint.
What was it?
Mendeleev was under a strict contract to write a 2-volume chemistry textbook. And he spent so much time detailing the first few elements that by the time he finished Volume 1, he realized he had only covered 8 of the 63 elements known to science at the time.
Oh, no. So he is facing a massive spatial constraint.
A massive one. He is legally obligated to fit the remaining 55 elements into a single remaining volume. He literally did not have the page count to write a dedicated chapter for each element.
Wow.
He desperately needed to invent a visual shorthand, like a classification system that could communicate complex atomic weights and chemical properties in a fraction of the space.
What is vital to understand here, though, is the intersection of his background and this sudden constraint. Because he was a polymath.
Yeah, he wasn't just a lab guy.
Right. He didn't just study chemistry in a sterile room. He was deeply involved in Russian agriculture. He studied political economy. He even consulted on cheese-making techniques of all things.
Cheese making, that's amazing.
Yeah. He possessed this sprawling, almost chaotic breadth of knowledge. But having a wide array of knowledge isn't enough on its own.
It's the water on the flat plain again.
Exactly. Without a constraint, all that diverse knowledge just dissipates. It took a highly rigid, unyielding box, a publishing contract that said, hey, you only have X amount of pages left to act as a pressure cooker.
To force the synthesis.
Yes. The constraint forced him to synthesize that sprawling breadth into the tightest, most elegant data visualization in the history of science.
And we see the exact same psychological mechanism operating in the arts, too. One of the most famous examples Epstein highlights involves Theodore Geisel.
Better known as Dr. Seuss.
Right. So Geisel had just achieved massive success with The Cat in the Hat. And that book was already the result of a constraint, by the way. He was given a specific vocabulary list of words that early readers needed to learn.
But his publisher, Bennett Cerf, decided to tighten the box even further, right?
He did. Cerf bet Geisel $50 that he couldn't write an entire coherent children's book using a total vocabulary of only 50 unique words.
Just stop and think about that limitation for a second. 50 words.
It's brutal.
Not 50 words per page, 50 total words for an entire narrative. That is an agonizing box to put a writer in. It completely strips away your ability to use descriptive adjectives, complex emotional arcs, or varied dialogue.
Yeah, you literally can't tell a normal story.
It fundamentally shuts down every traditional avenue of storytelling. But rather than suffocating Geisel's creativity, the constraint forced his cognitive miser into overdrive.
Because he couldn't be lazy about word choice.
Exactly. Because he couldn't rely on a broad vocabulary to keep the reader interested, he had to obsess over different mechanics.
Yeah.
He had to master rhythm and cadence and that sort of hypnotic repetition.
He had to use the words like puzzle pieces.
Yeah, he spent intense, really frustrating months wrestling with those 50 words, rearranging them like a mathematical equation. And the result of that agonizing constraint was Green Eggs and Ham.
Which goes on to become one of the best-selling, most enduring children's books in human history.
The 50-word limit wasn't a barrier to his genius. It was the essential scaffolding that forced the genius to emerge in a totally new way.
Okay, so we established that unlimited freedom ruins multi-billion-dollar tech projects at General Magic, while strict limitations birth scientific breakthroughs and literary masterpieces.
Right.
It's fascinating history. But for you, the listener tuning in right now, how does this map onto our modern, everyday reality? Because we are living in a cultural moment that just idolizes choice.
Oh, completely.
We want endless streaming options, endless career paths, endless consumer goods.
And this is where Epstein's research moves from, the historical to the deeply personal. And it's arguably the most important part of the book.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, we are drowning in freedom right now.
Drowning in it.
Epstein cites this Oxford professor, Eric Beinhocker, who calculated the explosion of consumer choice. Beinhocker estimates that the sheer number of distinct choices a modern citizen in a developed economy faces has increased by a factor of 100 million since the pre-industrial era.
Wait, 100 million times more choices?
Yes. Think about the contrast. For the vast majority of human history, your life was highly constrained. If you were born in a medieval village, you likely stayed in that village.
Your profession was whatever your parents did.
Exactly. Your romantic options were limited to a handful of people in a 5-mile radius. Today, you walk into a modern supermarket and you face 200 different varieties of salad dressing.
Right. You open a laptop and you can apply for jobs on 3 different continents in under an hour.
And we treat this explosion of choice as the ultimate victory of modern society.
We do, but it is deeply damaging to our psychology, isn't it?
It is. The 19th century philosopher Søren Kierkegaard actually saw this coming long before the internet. He wrote extensively about what he called the dizziness of freedom.
The dizziness of freedom.
He argued that when you expand a human being's choices beyond a certain threshold, the freedom stops feeling liberating and it starts feeling terrifying. It produces dread
But why dread specifically?
because every time you make a choice in a world of infinite options, you are simultaneously rejecting a million other possibilities. And the cognitive weight of that is just crushing.
Ah, I see.
You become paralyzed by the fear that there's a slightly better option out there and that making a definitive choice means missing out on perfection.
Well, if you want to see the dizziness of freedom operating in real time, look no further than the phone in your pocket. Modern dating apps are the perfect laboratory for Epstein's theories here.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's look at Tinder. Tinder's entire user interface is built on the premise of general magic. Absolute frictionless freedom. You can swipe left or right forever. There is no artificial limit, no forced interaction, no boundary.
And what is the psychological result of that frictionless UI? It breeds a culture of what behavioral psychologists call maximizer.
Maximizer.
Yeah, a maximizer is someone who feels compelled to evaluate every single possible option before committing to a decision. On an app with infinite profiles, the maximizer is constantly anxious.
Because there's always one more swipe.
Exactly. Even if they match with someone genuinely wonderful, the architecture of the platform whispers in their ear, are you sure? What if someone who is 1% funnier or 1% more attractive is just one more swipe away?
It makes commitment feel like a loss rather than a gain.
Precisely. But then look at how the market naturally course-corrected by introducing constraints. You have competitor apps like Bumble, which introduced a strict rule. Women must send the first message, and they only have 24 hours to do it, or the match disappears.
A time constraint.
Right. Or you have Hinge, which initially gave users a very strict limit on how many profiles they could like in a single day.
Epstein summarizes this so beautifully in the book. He says, Tinder is general magic. Hinge is the iPod. It is the exact same market, tapping into the exact same fundamental human desire for connection. But by building a smaller box, by adding artificial constraints like time limits and scarcity, the constrained platforms force intentionality.
You can't just mindlessly swipe.
No, you have to pause, evaluate the limited options in front of you, and actually engage.
This maps perfectly onto the Nobel Prize-winning research of economist Herbert Simon. Simon is the one who coined the terms maximizers and satisficers back in the 1950s.
Satisficers?
Yeah. We know the maximizers. They are the endless swipers, the people who research 50 different televisions for 3 weeks before buying one. Simon's research definitively showed that maximizers generally end up miserable.
I believe it.
They are plagued by buyer's remorse and chronic second-guessing.
Because they can never truly know if they made the absolute best choice.
Right. The alternative is to be a satisficer. A satisficer is someone who willingly builds a box. They look at the infinite world of choices and say, I am only going to evaluate these 5 options.
They set a boundary.
Exactly. They establish clear criteria for what is good enough for their needs. And the moment they find an option that meets that baseline criteria, they choose it, they commit to it, and they stop looking.
And the data shows they are vastly happier.
Consistently happier.
Yeah.
Because they don't carry the cognitive burden of infinite parallel universes where they made a different choice. They accept the boundary, and that acceptance frees up their mental energy to actually enjoy the choice they made.
Okay, so if we accept this, if we know our brains are cognitive misers that need canyon walls to force innovation, and we know that we need to be satisficers to avoid the paralyzing dread of infinite choice, how do we practically apply this?
In daily life, you mean?
Yeah, let's take it into the workplace. How do we actively structure systems and manage teams in a way that builds these healthy walls?
Well, the book turns to the research of Bent Fleibjerg, a professor who studies megaprojects and why they fail. And Fleibjerg identifies 2 competing philosophies of project management. The first is what he calls think fast, act slow.
Think fast, act slow.
Yes.
That was the general magic approach.
Yes.
Which sounds counterintuitive, honestly. Usually we want to act fast.
It's a description of a failure state, really.
Right.
Think fast means you rush the conceptual phase. You get a massive, grandiose vision, like a pocket crystal that does everything, and you immediately start building it without defining any boundaries, budgets, or constraints.
You just jump right in.
You just jump in. But because you rushed the thinking phase and didn't build a box, you inevitably encounter massive, tangled complexity during the execution phase. That complexity bogs you down, meaning your actual forward progress, the acting, slows to a painful, really expensive crawl.
So you act slow because you are drowning in the unconstrained complexity you created.
Exactly. The successful alternative is what Flybjerg calls Pixar planning, which operates on the inverse principle. Think slow, act fast.
The Pixar examples in Epstein's book are just a masterclass in this. Ed Catmull, one of the co-founders of Pixar, understood the cognitive miser deeply.
He really did.
He knew that brilliant, creative animators and directors, if left completely to their own devices, will wander off into the weeds and obsess over the wrong details. So Catmull became a genius at installing systemic constraints.
Like bumpers in a bowling alley.
Yes, to keep creative energy moving toward the pins.
One of the most effective bumpers is Pixar's three pitches rule.
Oh, I love this one.
When a director wants to make a new movie, they are not allowed to walk into a room with their one precious darling idea and just start developing it. Management forces them to develop and pitch three entirely distinct concepts for a film simultaneously.
Which sounds like a ton of extra work, but the psychological brilliance is that it prevents premature attachment.
Exactly.
If you only have one idea, your ego gets wrapped up in it, and you will defend it even if the story is fundamentally broken. By forcing the director to split their energy across three ideas, the constraint breaks that fixation and forces lateral thinking.
It forces the creator to remain objective. But Pixar also has to manage constraints during the actual production process, where perfectionism can become a crippling form of unconstrained freedom.
Right. There is that incredible story about the making of the movie The Incredibles.
Oh, the fish?
The fish. So the director, Brad Bird, is a known perfectionist. And there is a specific scene taking place in a room that happens to have a fish tank in the background. The director became absolutely hyperfixated on these background fish.
He wanted them perfect.
He wanted the animation of their scales to flicker with perfect photorealistic accuracy, mimicking the way light dances on actual fish scales.
And in 3D animation, simulating light reflection on moving scales requires an exorbitant amount of computing power and human labor.
An insane amount. The animators were spending weeks, dozens and dozens of human hours tweaking the lighting on fish that the audience would barely even notice, while the animation for the main characters was actually falling behind schedule. Ed Catmull refers to this as the beautifully shaded penny problem. It's when a team obsesses over a micro detail simply because they have the technical ability to do so, while the macro project suffers.
So how did Pixar impose a constraint to solve a hyperfixation problem like that?
They turned an abstract constraint into a visceral, physical object. Management took a bunch of wooden popsicle sticks and put Velcro on the back of them.
Okay.
They went to a large board and placed these sticks next to the names of the main characters that needed animation work. And they explained to the director that each popsicle stick represented a specific, non-negotiable amount of human hours.
Oh, that's clever.
They told him, we aren't going to tell you not to animate the fish, but if you want those scales to flicker perfectly, you have to walk up to this wall, physically peel a popsicle stick away from Mr. Incredible or Elastigirl, and stick it next to the fish. You have to physically decide what part of the movie is going to look worse so your fish can look better.
That is magnificent management.
Yeah.
They didn't just say, we have a budget. They forced the creative lead to actually feel the weight of the trade-off.
Right. By visualizing the constraint, the director instantly recognized the absurdity of his request. The fish were not worth sacrificing the main characters. The constraint forced the correct prioritization.
And we see this exact same principle, using tight, hyper-focused constraints rather than sweeping, unconstrained visions outside of the creative arts, too.
Yeah.
Look at logistics. Look at UPS.
This is a really fascinating pivot because logistics is all about math.
It is. UPS delivers millions of packages a day. To figure out the absolute most efficient route for every driver is a variation of what mathematicians call the traveling salesman problem.
Oh, right.
For you listening who might not be a math nerd, the traveling salesman problem asks a simple question. If you have a list of cities, and you must visit each one exactly once and return to the start, what is the absolute shortest possible route?
It sounds like a really simple puzzle, but mathematically it is a nightmare.
A total nightmare. If a driver only has to deliver 15 packages, there are over 43 billion possible routes they could take. A normal UPS driver delivers over 100 packages a day.
Which is mind-boggling.
Calculating the absolute perfect, mathematically flawless route for every driver every day would require more computing power than currently exists on Earth.
So a general magic approach to this problem would be to spend $1 billion trying to build a supercomputer that can solve the impossible math, chasing absolute perfection.
Exactly. But UPS didn't do that. They embraced the concept of satisficing. They built an algorithm called Orion. The constraint built into Orion wasn't to find the perfect route. The constraint was incredibly modest.
Hmm.
Just find a route that is good enough to reduce the driver's total daily mileage by exactly 1 single mile.
1 mile out of a 100-mile day seems almost trivial, honestly.
It does, but when you apply that tiny rigid constraint across a fleet of tens of thousands of trucks operating 300 days a year, the math explodes.
It scales up.
Yeah, shaving just 1 mile off each route saves UPS an estimated $50 million a year in fuel, tire wear, and maintenance costs. The tight, modest constraint vastly outperformed the unconstrained pursuit of perfection.
Okay, I want to step in here and play devil's advocate for a moment because as a listener, it's very easy to get swept up in these stories. The iPod, Dr. Seuss, Pixar, UPS, they are incredible narratives.
They are.
But I have to push back on Epstein's premise a bit. Isn't there a massive, glaring selection bias operating throughout this entire book?
What do you mean?
We are examining the constraints through the lens of survivor bias. We only hear the stories about the teams whose constraints forced a brilliant workaround.
That is a very fair critique.
Like, what about the thousands of startup teams or art projects that were boxed in, chronically underfunded, handed completely impossible deadlines by toxic management, and they didn't invent the iPod?
Right, they just burned out.
They burned out, suffered mental breakdowns, and produced absolute garbage. Does the book address the times when constraints don't create diamonds, but just crush the coal into dust?
I think you are hitting on the book's biggest blind spot. And to be completely honest, Epstein glosses over the failures. He is a journalist arguing a specific thesis, and he curated the most triumphant evidence to support it.
So the pushback is valid.
Your pushback is entirely valid. Simply starving a team of money and time does not magically guarantee a multi-billion-dollar breakthrough.
So how do we separate the two? If you want to use constraints in your own life or business, what is the metric that separates constraint that fuels creativity from one that destroys it?
The distinction really lies in understanding the difference between an enabling constraint and a crippling constraint.
Enabling versus crippling.
Right. An enabling constraint is Dr. Seuss being told to use 50 words, or Tony Fadell being told to hit a Christmas deadline. It is incredibly difficult, it creates friction, but it serves as a focal point.
It forces you to rethink the process.
Exactly. It forces you to drop your bloated processes and invent a leaner method. But most importantly, an enabling constraint still provides the baseline resources needed to execute the new idea.
Right, it defines the boundaries of the sandbox, but it still allows you autonomy to play however you want inside that box.
Exactly. A crippling constraint, on the other hand, is when the box is so small it crushes your ribs. It's a budget so slashed that you literally cannot afford the server space to run the code.
Or a manager who micromanages every single step.
Yeah, a structure so rigid that the team has zero autonomy to experiment with new methods. An enabling constraint forces you to use a new tool. A crippling constraint just breaks your tools and yells at you for not working faster.
That's a crucial distinction. But even with that caveat, we cannot let the reality of crippling constraints diminish how counterintuitive and disruptive Epstein's core message is to modern culture.
It's still a radical shift.
Because if you walk into any tech startup today, the prevailing ethos is still that more is always better. More venture capital, longer runways, more catered lunches, more freedom for the engineers.
And Epstein is dropping a bomb on that culture.
Yes, by pointing out that past a very basic threshold of resources, adding more freedom actively engages the cognitive miser and makes your team lazier and less creative.
It is a radical shift in perspective. And what's fascinating is how deeply this applies beyond corporate strategy or product development. When you really digest the mechanics of the cognitive miser and the paradox of choice, it forces you to look in the mirror.
Oh, totally.
I know for me, reading this book triggered a deeply uncomfortable aha moment about my own life.
I think we both had those moments. What was yours?
For me, it completely exposed how broken my creative process has been for years. I do a lot of writing, and I always bought into this highly romanticized bohemian myth of the writer.
The muse visiting you.
Yeah. I genuinely believed that to produce my best work, I needed to clear the deck entirely. I would intentionally give myself unlimited time. No hard deadlines, no daily word count goals, no structural outlines. I thought I was creating a pure space where the muse could visit and inspiration could strike naturally.
And let me guess, the muse never showed up.
It was a disaster. The cognitive miser in my brain took over immediately. Because I had no deadline, I felt no urgency. I would sit at a blank screen and produce absolutely nothing for hours.
Yep, the water on the flat plane.
Or worse, I would write one opening paragraph, and because I had infinite time, I would obsessively rewrite that single paragraph 20 times, trapped in a perfectionist loop, never actually moving the story forward.
You were the general magic engineer trying to code the calendar to the end of time.
I was drowning in my own unconstrained freedom. There's a section in the book where Epstein shares his own struggle with this. He talks about taking a fiction writing class where the professor imposed a brutal constraint. Write an entire short story with absolutely no dialogue.
No dialogue at all.
None. And Epstein panicked because, as a journalist, he relied entirely on quotes. If he couldn't explain a complex emotional beat, he would just insert a quote from a subject and let them do the work. It was his path of least resistance.
Right.
Banning dialogue forced his brain to figure out how to convey emotion through physical action and environmental description. Taking the tool away forced him to become a better writer.
That completely reframes the idea of discipline.
It really does. I realize that when I impose a box on myself, when I set a fake punishing deadline, or force myself to write 1,000 words before I can check my email, or ban myself from using certain crutch words, I am not restricting my art.
You're enabling it.
The box is the necessary permission structure to actually get the art out of my head and onto the paper. Without the walls, the water just spreads out into a swamp.
That resonates so deeply. My realization was slightly different, but rooted in the exact same fear of boundaries. It goes back to that Tinder versus Bumble analogy, the anxiety of infinite options.
Oh, the dating app dread.
Right. I have watched friends burn years of their lives on dating apps, endlessly swiping, going on hundreds of first dates, but never actually committing to a relationship because they are trapped in that maximizer mindset. They're terrified they might settle.
Yeah, always looking for the 1% better match.
And reading this book, I have this sudden, really terrifying realization. I don't do that with dating, but I do the exact same thing with my career decisions.
How does that manifest for you professionally?
I have this deeply ingrained, almost pathological habit of trying to keep every single option open at all times. I will take on a new project or a new role, but I will consciously hold back a percentage of my energy. I won't fully commit because I'm always keeping one eye on 3 other potential opportunities.
You're swiping left on your own jobs.
Yes, I am constantly waiting for the absolute perfect next move, the flawless opportunity that checks every single box to present itself.
You are living in the dizziness of freedom.
Exactly. And what this book laid bare for me is the staggering cost of that total freedom. By refusing to commit, by refusing to be a satisficer, I am never fully present in the work I am actually doing.
Wow.
By keeping all the doors propped open, I never actually walk fully into any one room to see what's inside. It prompted this really profound, uncomfortable question that I've been wrestling with all week. What if I just closed a few doors?
Shut them entirely.
What if I willingly constrained my career choices, intentionally burned a few bridges to alternate paths, and forced my brain to go all in on the path right in front of me?
That hits on a quote Epstein uses from the psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He's the one who pioneered the concept of flow.
Oh, right.
He said, accepting limitations is liberating, which sounds like an oxymoron until you experience it, because the moment you firmly close those other doors, you stop wasting 20% of your daily cognitive energy evaluating alternate reality.
You take all that reclaimed energy and pour it directly into making your chosen path a success.
Precisely. You stop obsessing over how you might live, and you actually start living.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you go back to your day? I think the ultimate takeaway from Epstein's work is a fundamental radical shift in how we view the world and our place in it.
A total paradigm shift.
Yeah. The next time you look at a competitor or a colleague or a massive corporation that seems to have unlimited resources, absolute freedom, and zero oversight, stop looking at them with envy.
Because we now understand the biology and psychology well enough to know that boundless freedom is very often a trap. It puts the brain to sleep.
Creativity, true creativity, whether you are trying to engineer the next smartphone, write a best-selling novel, or just navigate the next step in your career, is not found in the absence of boundaries. Breakthroughs require the presence of the right constraints.
The right walls.
So when you are stuck, don't ask for more time or money. Ask yourself, what new box can I build right now?
It completely flips the script on how we approach adversity. The obstacle isn't in the way. The obstacle is the engine.
It is the engine. So we open with General Magic, the brilliant team that had everything and made nothing. And the iPod, the same team, same talent, but boxed in by a Christmas deadline and a tiny budget.
That's the thing, isn't it? We spent this whole time talking about constraints as creative fuel, but the real reframe is simpler. Most of us don't need more space to think. We need more
Why,
walls.
just the people who imagined the iPhone 10 years before Jobs, they didn't need a better idea. They needed a deadline.
That's it for this episode of Deep Into the Pages.